Hi, Allie Bauer recording Chapter 9 video regarding government in education. Before I go into pretend staff meeting mode, I'll talk about the first question. So, my views of government in education, and this is just in general, um, I appreciate federal involvement in education, but only minimally. I think it's good for them to um, possess enough power so that they can ensure equity and that they can provide like a more of a synergy for our nation's school. I really like the idea of states having more control in comparison to the federal government. We are not a one size fits all nation, and so I don't think that we should operate as such. Okay, we'll get into the rest of it at a pretend staff meeting. So, thank you, teachers, for coming in. And before we get going on our in-service today, we're going to talk about just kind of update of what's going on around our nation in education, and I want to talk a little bit about the Common Core state standards. I know we don't have these. We have our own Nebraska state standards, and because it's not imminent that we are getting them right now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them, but I think it is interesting that we are one of only 4 states who have never adopted partially or completely the Common Core state standards. Also, there are 7 states that have withdrawn that previously had adopted in some shape or form. And so I think that's pretty telling. It tells us some stuff about the Common Core, and that information is according to academicbenchmarks.com. So some pros, after reading through several articles like on the Washington Post, NEA Today, Parents for Public Schools, I kind of came up with a list of pros and cons, and some of those pros are just mostly the idea of the continuity that it would provide, Common Core, the idea that everyone in America will have the same set of standards. I'd like that idea. From that we can better compare state testing, and we can have greater collaboration with those in our nation. You can collaborate with teachers from other states knowing that you're operating based on the same standards. And it definitely would be easier on our transient students. We have students moving in and out of the year, in the middle, and so I'm sure you've experienced firsthand how a student has come in, and for the 2 months of the school year that he's already had somewhere else, they were working on fractions while you were working on geometry, and so they come in and they don't have that knowledge that your other students have. So that would be easier on transient students if we all had that continuity. Supposedly, these standards push towards the higher level thinking skills. So if we're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, then that would be, instead of the identifying levels, we're getting up to the evaluate and assess levels, and then analyze, Also, reading is more heavily emphasized in the social studies and science subject areas. And so we're getting more practice with those reading skills outside of our reading block. There's also, going along with those higher levels of thinking, there's also a really big emphasis on critical thinking and problem solving. Now, coming from a former math teacher, I taught upper elementary math. Critical thinking and problem solving was something that I tried to get them to develop, every day. This is an everyday thing, And so that is enticing to me about the Common Core standards. Now, the cons is that when you get more federal involvement, you're getting less state. So you're losing some of that local control when you're getting more federal control. And so that might make it a little bit more difficult, and we're not used to, whereas our school boards and state governments have a little more control over what we're doing. Also, the standards have a very broad language. It's very vague, and so it's not always helpful when you're trying to interpret them because they are so broad and you can go so many different directions with that. But on the other hand, maybe it's a little bit of a pro because you can creatively interpret them and get more creative with them. Because these standards are more intense or at a higher level than some of the states out there, we might have to start students' education sooner, doing preschool at even earlier ages, which some might see as a negative aspect. And finally, I've seen in a lot of places, even on social media and other things, that the Common Core math has some issues. Parents are having a terrible time trying to understand it. This homework's coming home, and the problem says something along the lines of, you have 2 cookies and Sheila gives you 3 more, show your work using this number line, or using other ways, and they specifically tell you, which ways to show that information on, and automatically students know, well, she's got 5 cookies altogether, but then they have to spend hours trying to show their work in the way that Common Core wants them to on those assignments. And so they have the idea behind it is good, because you want that critical thinking, you want them to be able to explain their reasoning, but I think that's very discouraging for students, that they're having to spend hours explaining why 3 plus 2 is 5. And so not only is that discouraging for students, it's also for parents. So those are kind of some quick pros and cons of the Common Core standards. Like I said, we don't have them, obviously. At this time, it's not something that's coming. But with the presidential election coming up, it's important to note that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, they take very different views on the Common Core standards. And so I believe we're probably going to see some changes with either one of them being elected. So specifically, Clinton, she is a supporter of Common Core, has been for a long time. And so, I can't predict the future, but I really would not be surprised if she gets elected that we might be seeing more and more of Common Core. Donald Trump, he is adamantly against Common Core. So, again, can't predict the future, but if he does get elected, we might see that go, some changes, and maybe not such a high emphasis on Common Core. Going along with that, Trump also is in favor of, or would like to, lessen the staffing at the Department of Education and lessen the control that the federal government has over education, and give more of that back to the states. So really, we're seeing different things from the 2 different candidates, and so we'll have to hang in there and see how that goes, and keep our eyes open and be ready for some change. The last thing I want to talk about is kind of related to this idea of government in the education system, and thinking about taking back our public education, and what we can do to try and accomplish that really big feat. And I think we can sit and talk all day about, well, we need this, we need this, we need this. And a lot of the times, the things that we do think we need are these huge ideas that would require so many other things to accomplish. And so instead of focusing on those big ideas that would take legislation to pass and years to accomplish, I'm choosing to think about the little things that we can try to do in order to take back public education, just even within our own school here. So, first thing I think we should do is we should stop assuming sole responsibility for our youth's education. This school, you guys as teachers, all of us that work here together, we are not the only ones who teach these children. Actually, a child's first teacher is their parent, and they make that huge impact, and most likely a lasting impression on the child and their education. I hear teachers all the time, I used to do it too. We always make the excuse, not always, but we make the excuse sometimes that, oh, but his home life is so unfortunate. Home life really does affect the education, and so we can't assume that sole responsibility anymore. It's not only us. We're not the only ones who are responsible for this. And so what that means is that, you know, we can't go home, you know, frustrated with the weight of the world on our shoulder anymore. And I know that's way easier said than done. I have a problem with this myself. You know, I go home all downtrodden, thinking that I'm not doing as much as I can, making the impact that I need to make. But we have to keep in mind that it's not just us.